Okay. I'm going to start with a shameless plug. I'm reading from a Christmas story I just self-published. Every year I like to self-publish a Christmas story, and I donate all the money to Doctors Without Borders. So that's why I'm doing the shameless plug. So if you're interested in knowing what happens after I finish reading, I don't have the book because it's just a short story, so it's not in print. But you can Google Christmas present Kim Fielding, and it's 99 cents, and all the money will go to Doctors Without Borders, so you can do good, and it makes an excellent gift.
Apparently it's quite good.
Yes, somebody wrote a good review of it too. Okay, no more plugs. Okay. This boy is ignorance, and this girl is want, Lewis said in his most booming voice. Deny it if you want, but ignore them, and you're doomed. He wanted to add something about corporate tax cuts and slashing social welfare funding, but that might be taking it too far. Brevity was generally better anyway. Senator Ward's eyes had grown huge, and he held shaking hands to his mouth. Can't someone help them? He asked tremulously. Aren't there prisons? Don't we have zero-tolerance rules in their schools and neighborhoods? An invisible clock struck midnight. Lewis wrapped his cloak more tightly around himself, gave the senator a final stern glare, and disappeared. Disappearing was always an unsettling process. Tonight he stood in the darkness at the base of the Washington Monument one moment, and the next he was in his own brightly lit living room in Minneapolis, the television blaring a scene from the middle of Die Hard. Lewis remained still for a minute or two as the floor steadied under his feet and his stomach resettled into its proper place. Another one down, he announced to Fezziwig the cat, who stared with mild interest from his perch atop the couch. Fez was accustomed to Lewis's odd comings and goings. Lewis unbuckled his empty scabbard from around his waist and set it on an armchair. Then he unfastened his heavy green cloak and hung it near the door, giving the cloak's fur trim a couple of strokes. It might be sub-zero outside, but Lewis's apartment was cozy. Besides, his blood always ran warm around Christmas. I hope this one takes. He seemed pretty affected by the kids, that's for sure. But politicians are tricky ones. They look penitent when you leave them, but the next day they meet with a lobbyist and poof, they forget they briefly had a conscience. He sighed heavily, disentangled the holly wreath from his curly hair, and hung it beside the cloak. Wearing nothing but a pair of black compression leggings, Lewis made his way to the kitchen. Fez rushed in to join him and jumped onto the counter beside the sink. Lewis turned on the faucet and watched Fez lap at the resulting trickle. Although Lewis kept the cat's water bowl filled, Fez preferred running water. Well, if I didn't get the job done with Senator Ward, maybe yet to come will. That spooky bastard scares the shit out of everyone. Lewis gave a little shudder. The few times he had encountered the guy, assuming he was a guy, impossible to tell underneath the black hooded robe, yet to come had never said a word. He just waved at Lewis with his bony hand. Not that androgynous past was much better, with their tendency to grow random arms and legs or temporarily lose their head. Fez finished his drink and shook his head, splashing water onto Lewis and the counter before hopping down, striding back into the living room and settling onto the couch. Maybe he was a Bruce Willis fan. Lewis remained in the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee while nuking some leftover pizza. As he sat at the table, he hoped he'd get to finish his snack before the next call came. The clock on the microwave flashed blue zeros. If Lewis had bothered to fetch his phone from the bedside, its clock would be blinking too. Time was as bendy as space in the period leading up to Christmas. Lewis could travel thousands of miles in an instant, and the night could last for days. That had shaken him at first, 15 years ago, but now he expected everything to be wonky. It was part of the gig. He had no idea how it worked, but then he didn't know how his TV and iPhone worked either. They just did. He burned his tongue on the pizza, but wolfed it down anyway. Then he sat with his coffee, waiting. This part sucked. Going on the calls was fine, but he hated not knowing when he'd be unceremoniously yanked away or where he'd end up. Back in his robe and wreath and scabbard, looming over some poor sap who needed to stop being a selfish asshole. Lewis sighed. He liked his small kitchen, which was cozy and well-designed. When it wasn't Christmas time, he enjoyed puttering around, experimenting with new recipes. Back in October, he'd been on a bread-baking kick. In November, he'd bought a tagine and played around with North African cuisine. He was looking forward to January, when he'd get a chance to break in the air fryer and Instant Pot he'd bought himself for Christmas. December, however, meant pizzas, burgers, sub-sandwiches, burritos, anything he could pick up and fast and gobble quickly. The microwave blinked, he sipped his coffee, and nothing happened. Maybe he was done for tonight. That'd be nice. He could curl up on the couch and watch movies with Fez. Not It's a Wonderful Life, because that hit a bit too close to home. It was like watching a work training video. Elf would be entertaining, though. The Animated Grinch? Gremlins? How about an old classic such as The Bishop's Wife? Or... Lewis's stomach took a sharp right turn, the entire kitchen slipped sideways, and the lights went out. When his vision cleared, he found himself on a sidewalk in front of a strip mall. That was odd. He usually ended up in someone's living room. Although it was nighttime, the air carried only a faint chill, and Lewis was too warm under his heavy cloak. California, he guessed. Not enough humidity for Florida. And besides, the mall seemed to consist entirely of Asian restaurants. Thai, Taiwanese, bubble tea, Northern Chinese, sushi, a ramen place. Most of them appeared to be open, but the parking lot held only a scattering of cars. Where the hell was Lewis supposed to go, and who was his target? Had there been a bug in the system? That idea unsettled him. He had never before questioned the trustworthiness of whatever it was that sent him on his jobs. But if it was fallible, that meant he could get stuck somewhere far from home. Or worse, stuck in the terrifying in-between. Get a grip, Lewis muttered. And then, because no other course of action came to mind, he stepped into the nearest restaurant, a Korean fried chicken place. At 6'9", almost 400 pounds, and with his long coppery hair and flowing beard, Lewis tended to make an entrance wherever he went, year-round. But dressed as he was a spectacle. The restaurant's few patrons all gaped, and a young woman with a tray of dirty dishes stopped in her tracks. Everyone was so still, Lewis began to wonder if he really was caught in some kind of time glitch. But then someone peeked out from the kitchen. First a thatch of unruly dark hair, then a pair of wide eyes, and then a broad smile. The owner of those white teeth emerged entirely and trotted over. "Hi! I'm supposed to say welcome in. That's like the trendy thing, right? But I'm not the trendy type, so let's skip it. Table for one?" Lewis blinked a few times. The man was in his mid-30s, Lewis guessed, slender and tall, although still far short of Lewis's towering frame. He wore a black t-shirt with the restaurant's cartoon chicken logo, blue jeans, and a pair of hot pink Converse high tops. Those shoes reminded Lewis of what he currently lacked. Never mind. He backed up a step. I forgot my shoes." The guy looked down, but the long cloak dragged on the floor and Lewis's feet weren't visible at all. The guy's mouth quirked. "It'll be our secret. I don't think any health inspectors are going to show up at 9:45 p.m. on Christmas Eve." "Forgot my wallet, too. I'm sorry." Lewis turned to leave, but the man caught his sleeve. "No worries. Look, it's been a really slow night, and we're going to close in 20 minutes, and there's way too much product back there." He jerked his head toward the kitchen. "Let me bring you some chicken." Lewis knew he should refuse. He was supposed to be working, not eating, and his temporary inability to pay was embarrassing. But the food smelled great, and as usual, he was hungry. The man who still held Lewis's sleeve had kind brown eyes and plump pink lips. "I can send you the money later after I get home." "No big deal. Consider it a holiday gift." "You don't even know me." The guy stuck out his hand, and Lewis found himself shaking it. "Sammy Park. Now you know me." I'm the ghost of Christmas Present." Ignoring Lewis's wince, Sammy chuckled. "You feel pretty solid for a ghost." He was still clasping Lewis's hand. "I'm not the dead kind of ghost." Yeah, that made sense. "Clearly, otherwise you wouldn't want any chicken. Come on, ghost, have a seat." Seemingly as cheerful as a person could be, Sammy led him to a table not far from the cash register and pulled out a chair. Out of habit, Lewis eyed the seat to make sure it would hold him. As he sat, his stomach gurgled. "I can bring you a menu," Sammy offered. "Unless you trust me." How could Lewis not trust him? "I'm sure I'll love whatever you bring." Sammy winked and hurried into the kitchen.